First things first, how are you?
Really good. Happy to be here, man.
Very good to
Always.
have you.
Holland has been extremely good to me, as you probably know. It's the first country in Europe that really accepted my music, so it feels like coming home.
This is very difficult maybe to answer, but do you know why?
I've asked people why, and I think it's because there's a lot of love for jazz here, and I think people get excited, for example, when The Dreamer came out, of a new jazz artist taking it in a slightly different direction. So I think it's kind of like, oh, I know this sound, I know this guy, and he's doing something kind of interesting, and it resonates, you know,
Right.
and it's honest, you know. I don't think you can do jazz and not be honest. I think you can do other kinds of music and not be honest.
For instance?
Some pop stuff. I mean, I think it's possible to like want to just be like a pure entertainer and not care about the song.
Right.
I'm not saying that it's all pop at all. I love pop, but I think it's possible to do it, you know, and just sort of say, well, this song's going to get me to this place financially in my
Right.
career, and I'm going to do it for that, or I'm going to sing on this artist song for the career part of it, for the money, basically. And jazz, there isn't a lot of for the money. You don't go into jazz to make money.
Well, is that the thing that when you go into jazz, you know it's going to be difficult? If you go back to your earlier days, was that a consideration you had to make?
I think so. I mean, nobody ever says like, hey, you're going to be an overnight success. I don't think there exists such a thing as an overnight success really in jazz. And really, to be fair, in music, period. You know, for every, you know, you look at how hard Katy Perry works, for example, you know, to this day, or Lady Gaga. But you can certainly argue that kind of like a single that could come out in a pop world that could propel you somewhere doesn't exist in jazz. You know, didn't happen for Miles Davis or
Right.
Ella Fitzgerald, you know what I mean? Though I guess you could argue Tiska to Task, it was kind of her single. But back then jazz was pop music, so that's a different thing.
But so when you kind of, well, it's not necessarily a crossroads, but when you kind of started making music, what was the aim? What kind of drove you?
Well, first I wanted to be a rapper.
Okay.
I loved hip hop. I still love it. You know, I was musically surrounded by some of the greatest albums to come out of hip hop. You know, really golden age, 90s, Tribe Called Quest, the Beastie Boys, Ice Cube, Tupac, you know, later Biggie. I mean, it was great, man.
Sure.
Like 90s through the early 2000s was really inspiring. Outkast, you know. And it seemed like every week you discover this new band, oh, The Far Side, wow, they're amazing. And, you know, that was sort of the dominant creative force for me. I also loved indie rock, too. We didn't call it indie rock then. It was just, I don't know, we didn't call it anything. Just Pearl Jam, right? But I wanted to express myself, and I discovered jazz through hip-hop samples, through the production. And so my ear just kind of gravitated, in a way, I think how Kendrick Lamar's ears gravitate now towards Terrace Martin and kind of more jazz-oriented stuff. You know, it's more
Right.
interesting.
But so were you putting thoughts to paper at that time already?
I don't know if I was doing anything like that. I think it was more of a concept internally.
Right.
And I was interested in bands like Diggable Planets, who were combining jazz, really more jazz, with rap and hip hop. Guru. I mean, there were a lot of kind of like experiments in that I thought were really interesting. And then on the other side, you have artists like Kurt Elling, who's here tonight, Cassandra Wilson, and this sort of like new generation of jazz singers who weren't singing necessarily just standards. They were writing stuff. And Blue Light Till Dawn, you know, that's always going to go down as one of the most groundbreaking vocal jazz albums on Blue Note of all time. And so for me, it was a really exciting time when it seemed like it was just progressive left and right, you know.
Well, because that's an interesting thing that you mentioned, because there are also a lot of jazz purists who say jazz is this and it has to be like this. But you welcomed that the change, obviously.
Well, I'm a student of history,
Mm.
and so I know that. I mean, I've read the interviews, for example, of John Tynan saying that, you know, Eric Dolphy and John Coltrane are meaningless, you know, and just ridiculous things. So I know that there exists a strain of humanity that is just simply resistant to change. And I think we can all admit that we are all in some ways resistant to change, you know.
Sure.
We have our comfortable things, you know, whether it's a pair of tennis shoes or a restaurant, you know, I want to go to that restaurant,
Sure.
you know. And it's certainly the case for jazz too. But as a true student of the history of the music, I also know the real history musically is innovation.
Mm.
Miles Davis didn't sound like Louis Armstrong, you know, neither did Freddie Hubbard, Dizzy Gillespie, you know. Christian Scott doesn't sound like any of them either. He's not playing with the same kind of stuff. He's playing over trap beats these days. I mean,
Right.
he's keeping pace with the world. And to me, the purest form of jazz is that energy that keeps pace with the world and is creative within it.
Right. So,
It's a great pull quote.
but so when you start, and then you've released a bunch of albums. So when you start with a new project, is it a completely blank canvas in a way?
I would say no. I'd say even though it might be almost impossible for the listener to perceive it,
Mm-hmm.
each album flows out of the preceding one. Each album is really a reaction and a comment on the former.
Mm.
Yeah. For example, I just recorded a tribute to Billie Holiday,
Right.
which contained Strange Fruit, you know, her protest song against lynching. And I was performing that during this time of, and it's still continuing, you know, persecution,
Sure.
Racism, murder of African Americans by police and other people in America. And so it was resonating with me, and that sort of got me on this concept of like, I don't know, should I make a political album? Or is it even more political to be a black artist singing love songs when you're not supposed to, when you're supposed to be throwing bricks through a window or whatever, you know?
Right.
So that kind of was the inner process that people don't see.
Was that because I read about this, where you first thought about doing a double album, and then one side being the love side and one side being the frustration or anger?
Yeah.
But was it a difficult decision then to kind of try and focus on the positive side?
It's not difficult. I mean, the only thing I find difficult in making an album is like trying to force something.
Mm.
The song that like you write in 10 minutes and like you scribble on a piece of paper, or you just say like the beat's like and then they start playing it and you record it, that's the song that like makes the album. The song for me, when you come in with like all these charts and okay, here, like this is where we're going to transition into this feel, and then you're like nitpicking over the production, for me that stuff doesn't make the album. You know, because at least for my music and the way it's happened for me, like it's got to be a creative flow and like express a moment. And even though Love in a Time of Madness is way more produced in the technical sense than, for example, The Dreamer of Billie Holiday stuff, it still has that moment of synchronicity between the producers and the writers and myself and the musicians creating this moment and that live performance of the vocal as well.